The Soul Drinkers were a renegade chapter of the Adeptus Astartes established during the course of the Second Founding. For much of their existence, the Soul Drinkers were officially recognized even within their own records as being descended from the 7th Legion of the Legione Astartes, the Imperial Fists. Many of the chapter's founding members were said to have been drawn from those Imperial Fists that specialized in the act of ship-to-ship boarding actions and orbital shock assault. Shortly after their founding, the chapter would come into possession of an ancient relic known as the Soul Spear, a weapon that was supposedly wielded by none other than Rogel Dorn himself, after the Primarch discovered it upon a cold and lifeless world during the course of the Great Crusade. According to chapter legend, the Soul Drinkers were entrusted with possession of the Soul Spear by Rogel Dorn as a way of showing that, despite the chapter no longer being Imperial Fists, the Primarch still held the Soul Drinkers in high esteem, although the relic itself would become lost sometime around M40. Prior to being declared excommunicate traitoris by the Inquisition, the Soul Drinkers were famed throughout the Imperium as proud and noble defenders of humanity. During the events of the War of the Beast, the Soul Drinkers would answer the summons of the last Imperial Fist, Captain Corland, following the initiation of the Last War Protocol, in hopes of presenting a united front against the immeasurable hordes of the Orc warlord known as the Beast. The Soul Drinkers, alongside the Crimson Fists, Black Templars, Fists Exemplar, and Excoriators chapters, would even contribute a number of their assets, which included not only warriors, but a portion of their gene seed stocks, in order to re-establish the Imperial Fists following their extinction at the hands of the Orcs. Sometime during M41, approximately 1,000 years after the Soul Spear had become lost, the chapter would be informed that the artifact had come into the possession of an organization known as the Van Scorval Cartel, which was based upon an orbital defense platform within orbit of the world of Laconia. Seeking to ensure the swift return of such a priceless relic, the chapter would dispatch 3 entire battle companies in order to retrieve the Soul Spear. Before the chapter could finally reclaim what was rightfully theirs, a contingent of Adeptus Mechanicus troops would teleport into the vault containing the artifact and spirit it away before the Soul Drinkers could react. The chapter demanded for the Mechanicus to return the Soul Spear to them. However, the Tech Priests would refuse this demand, for the artifact, now in the possession of Archmagus Kobatov, was already en route to his forge world of Codan Tertius. This would lead to the Soul Drinkers and Mechanicus engaging one another in battle. After destroying both the Mechanicus research vessel and the Scorvold orbital platform, the chapter would flee from the system, leading to the remaining elements of the Imperial battle fleet to set off in pursuit of the Astartes, forcing the Soul Drinkers to seek refuge within an asteroid belt known as the Siberian Field. This would result in a prolonged stalemate between the Soul Drinkers and the remainder of Imperial forces, which lasted for several months, prompting the Inquisition to intervene. After taking control of the fleet, the Inquisition offered the Soul Drinkers a chance to surrender and be punished accordingly for attacking Mechanicus forces, although the chapter would refuse. As a result, Lord Inquisitor Gorgosaurus of the Ordo Hereticus would declare the Soul Drinkers as excommunicate traitoris. Before the Inquisition could unleash the Emperor's wrath upon the Astartes, however, the remainder of the Soul Drinkers' fleet would arrive in order to extract their brothers and have them brought before their then chapter master Gorgolian for censure. In the aftermath of this series of events, the chapter would experience much sorrow and strife, such as suffering numerous chapter civil wars and even having a number of their warriors slowly falling to the corrupting influence of chaos. Despite becoming increasingly disillusioned with the Imperium itself, and even becoming the unknowing pawns of a demon prince named Abraxas, the majority of the Soul Drinkers would still view themselves as loyal servants of the Emperor of Mankind and would continue to fight against traitor and Xenos forces alike, in addition to those Imperial forces that sought their destruction. Eventually, after a prolonged campaign to aid the population of a non-Imperial system evacuate from a Necron invasion, a small surviving number of Soul Drinkers, including that of Sarpedon, a librarian that had usurped Gorgolian as chapter master, would be captured by the Imperial Fists and brought to their immense flagship, the Phalanx, in order to stand trial for their crimes. It was here, upon the Phalanx, that Commander Gethsemar of the Angel Sanguine chapter would reveal that the Soul Drinkers, despite what official records had claimed, were not descended from the gene seed of Rogel Dorn.
I am saying that Rogel Dorn is not your Primarch. I cannot say who is. The sanguinary priests have yet to complete their discourses on the matter. But Dorn's gene seed is among the most stable and recognizable of all those among the Adeptus Astartes, and there can be no doubt that the Soul Drinkers do not possess it. That is the news I came to the Phalanx to deliver. That is why the Angel Sanguine sought a place at this court.
Despite all the crimes that the chapter had been charged with, many of the surviving Soul Drinkers would choose to aid the Imperial Fists in their defense against a demonic incursion which had been orchestrated by the heretical chaplain Deniathos. Only 3 loyalist Soul Drinkers would survive the battle, who would then choose to journey into a warp gate that had been conjured by Sarpedon. While the chapter is officially considered extinct, the Imperial Fists would erect a monument dedicated to the Soul Drinkers within their Apothecarion, having finally been convinced of the chapter's dedication to the Emperor, and viewing them as brothers indeed, if not by blood. But the main question that currently remains unanswered is that if the Soul Drinkers are in fact not descended from the bloodline of Rogel Dorn, as had initially been believed, then from which of the first founding legions could the chapter be descended from? The Soul Drinkers are known to sport a somewhat unique flaw within their gene seed stocks, with the chapter's warriors developing an overly active homophagia organ. This organ normally allows a Space Marine to experience the final memories of the recently deceased through the consumption of their flesh. The homophagia of the Soul Drinkers, by contrast, will simultaneously transmit these memories to the Astartes with a greater intensity and a higher degree of ambiguity. Aside from this, the chapter appears to display no additional flaws or genetic traits which could trace their lineage back to any one specific legion. One admittedly weak possibility is that the Soul Drinkers are descended from the 5th legion of the Legione Astartes, the White Scars. This is due to a specific connection found between the 2 chapters, which existed within older sources. According to chapter-approved Book of the Astronomicon, the White Scars boasted a unique formation within their chapter that specialized in shock assault, with the warriors of this formation being designated as the Soul Drinkers. While the canonicity of this information is debatable at best, both the White Scars and the Soul Drinkers are known to share a number of similar psychological traits, such as their martial pride and a somewhat insular nature. Aside from this, however, there is little, if any, definitive links between the two. Statistically speaking, if the Soul Drinkers were descended from a legion other than the Imperial Fists, then it is likely for the chapter to have been created utilizing Ultramarines' genetic stock, as the Ultramarines would go on to establish the single greatest number of successor chapters. What potentially rules out the possibility of the Soul Drinkers being a successor chapter of the Ultramarines or the White Scars is due to what was specifically said by Commander Gethsemar. When Gethsemar relayed to Sarpedon that Rogel Dorn is not the gene father of the Soul Drinkers, he made sure to specify that this is due to Dorn's gene seed being not only one of the most recognizable, but also one of the most stable. This would suggest that the Soul Drinkers are descended from a legion whose gene seed displays greater odds for displaying signs of genetic degradation or mutation. Of the 9 Loyalist legions, the gene seed of the Blood Angels, Space Wolves, and Salamanders is considered to be the most unstable, sporting between a 50 to 90% chance of exhibiting flaws and defects. Of these, the Space Wolves would sire only a single successor chapter before their gene seed would mutate to such an extreme degree that only aspirants taken from their homeworld of Fenris were capable of accepting it. With this in mind, it is theoretically possible that the Soul Drinkers could be descended from the Salamanders due to a potentially shared genetic instability. What makes this prospect ultimately unlikely, however, is that following the introduction of the Codex Astartes, the Salamanders were the sole legion to be made exempt from being divided into chapters. While a number of later Space Marine chapters, such as the Black Dragons and Storm Giants, are rumoured to be Salamander's successors, the fact that the Soul Drinkers were established during the second founding would appear to rule out this possibility. This would appear to leave the Blood Angels as the best possible candidate from the Loyalist legions in regards to the identity of the primogenitor of the Soul Drinkers. What potentially reinforces this possibility is due in part to the chapter's iconography. The heraldry of the Soul Drinkers is that of a chalice or grail. Similar such iconography is also displayed amongst the Blood Angels and their successor chapters, with some, such as the Blood Drinkers, even making use of such imagery for their own heraldry. One of the holiest relics held by the Blood Angels is that of a golden chalice known as the Red Grail, which is said to contain the very blood of the Primarch Sanguinius himself. With this in mind, it would be somewhat reasonable to assume that the Soul Drinkers could be connected to the Blood Angels in some way. What makes this particular hypothesis somewhat dubious is that the Soul Drinkers fail to exhibit signs of the two primary flaws found within Blood Angel's genetic stock: the Red Thirst, which instills an unnatural and almost uncontrollable craving for blood, and the Black Rage, a psychological flaw that causes those who succumb to it to believe that they are their Primarch Sanguinius during his final moments of life. That being said, however, it is always possible that the Soul Drinkers were simply fortunate enough to not have succumbed to such flaws, similar to how the Lamenters chapter would only begin manifesting such defects around the onset of the Badab War, although this is highly unlikely. While the Soul Drinkers may not appear to share any obvious genetic links with the 9 Loyalist legions, the key to uncovering the chapter's genetic heritage may be found within their sacred relic, the Soul Spear. As mentioned earlier, the Soul Spear was said to have been discovered by Rogel Dorn during the course of the Great Crusade upon a cold and barren world. The spear itself was fitted with a series of genetic locks, which according to the Soul Drinkers themselves meant that only a true Son of Dawn was able to properly harness the weapon's power. However, given the revelations made by the Angel Sanguine regarding the chapter's gene seed, this would instead suggest that only those who bear the biological markers of the Soul Drinkers and their true parent legion are able to properly wield the weapon. But what if instead of Dawn acquiring the Soul Spear during the Great Crusade, the Primarch had, in actuality, obtained it during the course of the Horus Heresy? If this were indeed the case, then is it possible that the Soul Spear could be, in actuality, the Pale Spear? The Pale Spear was a powerful weapon of unknown origin which demonstrated similar destructive capabilities to that of the Soul Spear, and served as the signature weapon of Alfarius, the Primarch of the Alpha Legion. During the battle for Pluto, Rogel Dorn would slay Alfarius in battle, impaling his brother with his own spear before severing his hands and finally delivering a killing blow with the chain blade Storm's Teeth. However, it remains unknown as to what became of the Pale Spear following the culmination of the battle. While the Soul Spear itself was described as being only the length of a man's forearm, as shown within the novel Soul Drinker, the Pale Spear, as documented within Praetorian of Dawn, was able to have both its shaft and blades separated into a number of smaller forms. Thanks to this modular construction, this allowed the Pale Spear to be reassembled into a number of differing configurations. With this in mind, it's possible that the Pale Spear was taken as a trophy by Rogel Dorn before eventually entrusting it to the Soul Drinkers. Because of the genetic locks employed by the Soul Spear, if this artifact is indeed the Pale Spear, then this would appear to imply that the Soul Drinkers are derived from Alpha Legion genetic stock, rendering them a successor chapter of the 20th Legion. In this case, the chapter could have been founded by the Order of Dawn himself, either from the ground up or possibly with an unknown number of Alpha Legion loyalists to serve as its foundation in order to act as the guardians of the Pale Spear, and in turn prevent such a powerful weapon from falling back into the hands of the Alpha Legion itself. Dawn could then have used his political influence to ensure that the Soul Drinkers would be officially recognized within Imperial records as being an Imperial Fist successor chapter. While there is little else to support the notion that the Soul Drinkers are in truth the sons of Alfarius, if the Soul Spear and Pale Spear are indeed connected, then this would still remain as one of the stronger hypotheses regarding the chapter's genetic heritage. The final major possibility, which is admittedly one of the least likely, is that the Soul Drinkers can trace their lineage back to one of the two lost legions. Despite the exact circumstances that led to the Primarchs of the 2nd and 11th Legions being erased from the annals of Imperial history remaining unknown, the fate of their warriors has been heavily alluded to. Within the story Chamber at the End of Memory, Malcador the Sigillite reveals to Rogel Dawn what became of the 2nd and 11th Legion's warriors, after Dawn discovered that all of his memories regarding his lost brothers had been utterly erased from his mind.
The loss of the 2nd and the 11th was such a wound upon us, and it threatened the ideals at the heart of the Great Crusade. It would have ruined all that we had built in the drive to reunite humanity and drive off our enemies. Steps had to be taken. The legionnaires they left behind, leaderless and forsaken, were too great a resource to be discarded out of hand. They did not share the fate of their fathers. You and Rubicante argued in their favor, but you do not recall it. It fell to me to see that they were attuned to new circumstances. I granted them a mercy, a second chance.
Because of the fact that Rogel Dawn and Rubicante Guilliman argued in favour of the Lost Legionaries, it is implied that these warriors, after all memories of their gene fathers had been erased by Malcador, were integrated into the ranks of the Ultramarines and Imperial Fists legions specifically. The Ultramarines Legion in particular were rumoured to have had their numbers increased by an unprecedented amount at some point during the course of the Great Crusade, which some have attested to the possibility of the 13th Legion receiving an influx of warriors from the 2nd and 11th Legions. However, some have suggested that the reason for the Ultramarines having such a vast number of warriors is due more in part to the general lack of casualties suffered by the Legion when compared to the other legions. Nonetheless, this does suggest that it is at the very least minutely possible for the Soul Drinkers to be derived from 2nd or 11th Legion genetic stock, although such a claim is impossible to verify. Perhaps the Soul Drinkers themselves are still true Sons of Dawn, and that the reason as to why their gene seed stocks have become no longer recognizable as such is due to the sheer amount of mutation that many of the chapter's warriors would undergo following their excommunication. Although one would imagine that at least some lingering remnant of their Dornian heritage would still be noticeable if this were indeed the case. Since the last surviving members of the chapter have long since disappeared into the depths of the warp, we may never know for certain. What do you think? Leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.